Hi everyone, welcome to the Reading Fabricator. I'm Russell and today I'm going to talk to you about The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, an 1820 short story by Washington Irving. This is a story I've known about for a very long time, have refused to read it and just kept putting it off and off and off. And there's no reason why. I mean, it's really short, and I was quite surprised at the fact that my edition that I had was around 40 pages roughly. And my first introduction to this is well, it's basically the Tim Burton film. I watched it with my sister when I was, I think, about 7 and she was 5. My dad put it on, I thought it'd be a laugh and scare the shit out of us, and it did scare us tremendously at the time. I've since rewatched it and realized that the movie is actually a lot more funny than it is scary. But the idea behind this so-called legend, this superstition that pervades that section of America, has always stuck with me, and I've always been curious about these sort of things, and so I finally caved in and I read it, and it is a lot different than I ever thought it would be. So let's get into it. Right, so the titular tale is again, it's a short story contained in a collection of 34 essays and short stories titled The Sketchbook of Geoffrey Crayon Gent, which Irving wrote the story itself whilst living in Birmingham, England. And Washington Irving himself is a legendary cat. There is so much to dive into this one. I highly recommend, even at the very least, using Wikipedia just to look into this man's life. He has done some crazy stuff and has basically swapped stories with some of the greatest authors of the time, especially both in Europe and in America. And he was one of the forefathers of basically making it so that American fiction, or just fiction in general, being written in that time, could be self-sufficient and be economically viable for authors. Before him, it was a lot harder, and he was a proponent of that. Known for being part of the Romanticism literary movement, he's one of the few American writers to achieve great acclaim in Europe, overseas from America, and he was known for being quite encouraging to other American authors such as Nathaniel Hawthorne and Herman Melville and Edgar Allan Poe. Nathaniel Hawthorne you'd know from The Scarlet Letter, Herman Melville obviously Moby Dick, although the latter life of Herman Melville was quite sad considering everything, including Moby Dick onwards, was basically a big failure for him, and it wasn't until years later where he achieved great success and acclaim, even though he was dead basically. And everyone knows Edgar Allan Poe, but those are the sort of people that he was hanging around with and encouraged them to continue writing. And he himself was admired by some of the greatest British authors of that time period and of all time, which would include Charles Dickens, Mary Shelley, and Lord Byron. Now, I don't know about Lord Byron, I've never read any of his work, but Charles Dickens and Mary Shelley are obviously well known. Mary Shelley, Frankenstein, which has since seen quite a popularity resurgence due to Guillermo del Toro's film, and to a lesser extent, although I still want to see it, and it looks quite cool, the punk rock version that's based on The Bride of Frankenstein, which Maggie Gyllenhaal just recently made, and I'm curious to watch that one too. It actually looks like a lot of fun, but that itself is an offspring of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and its own separate entity. But these are the sort of people he was hanging around with. So he was a big deal back then. He was both an essayist, a biographer, very satirical, which I'll get to in this book here. Known for writing historical books which mixed elements of both fiction and fact. And of all things, he was a diplomat. In fact, I believe he was an American diplomat that was sent to Spain for a time there. But the biggest thing ever was that he advocated for writing as a legitimate profession and basically argued for stronger laws to protect American writers, of all things, from copyright infringement, which was a big deal back then. So he was one of the forefathers of basically getting literature off the ground in America, and allowing for it to become its own self-sufficient piece of economic viability for authors back then, leading up to today. So he's the stuff that he advocated back then still trickles down to authors today. So a lot is owed to him, but the big question that I've come across in my research is whether or not he was actually a great author. Obviously he's well known, or if people just respect him a lot because he was one of the few that actually made it possible for the way things are today. I cannot comment on it. I have not looked into it further. I may be wrong about that, but please correct me on that. It's just, there's so much to dive in on this fellow. So yeah, if you get a chance to look up Washington Irving, and yeah, he was born in 1778 and died in 1859, and he was buried at Sleepy Hollow Cemetery. And he spent a lot of time around that area, so obviously this book here, which is his most well-known piece of work by miles. I mean miles. I don't know anything else this guy has done, but when I approached it, I was always of the affiliation that this was a terrifying story. And I don't know whether it's a product of the times, but when I read it, I realized that the Legend of Sleepy Hollow is actually not scary. It's cool and it has an aura about it and a very atmospheric style writing, but there are other authors that I've read more along the 1890s onwards that I think are far more scarier. Robert Chambers comes to mind with The King in Yellow, and obviously Lovecraft, but those two came way down the track. So again, Washington Irving is one of the forefathers of this thing. And the story of how the Legend of Sleepy Hollow came to be is quite interesting because there's all these different theories as to why he came up with the Headless Horseman. And some of the theories was when he was living in Birmingham, Europe, he was encouraged by another author to basically research German folklore. And in German folklore, not just German, but in other folklore around Central Europe there was all these tales or these mentionings of a Headless Horseman. On top of that, you also have the Revolutionary War, which happened obviously in America, but in the Revolutionary War there was a tale of a Hessian, I think it's called a Hessian soldier, who was basically a German mercenary fighting for the British. And during the Battle of White Plains, which was October 1776, there was talks of a soldier having their head decapitated by a cannonball during a battle that occurred around Tarrytown, which Tarrytown's just off from Sleepy Hollow. Sleepy Hollow is its own area that's rural around Tarrytown. And the first thing that came to my mind was the movie The Patriot, the Mel Gibson movie, which I enjoy, and I don't know about the historical authenticity of it, but I remember watching it when I was a lot younger and actually really enjoying it. And obviously there's a scene where him and Heath Ledger are looking out the window of a house and seeing the British and the US with their soldiers in a line doing that horrifying thing where they're all in a line just walking towards each other, firing their rifles and reloading, which must have been an absolute suicide death sentence. But there's one part where a cannonball flies and it hits the ground and it goes towards the camera and ends up taking a soldier's head off. And that was the first thing I thought of, and I thought, well, did they put that in the movie as a reference to this soldier that obviously did die from this and was buried, I believe, at the same cemetery in Tarrytown, and is now basically the reference point for Washington Irving for the Legend of Sleepy Hollow. This soldier did not have a name, so he was just buried in an unmarked grave, but it's a true story that happened. So that's just two theories, but there's other theories that lead onto this. And so there's all this backdrop regarding to the production and the writing of this little tiny short story. Again, 40 pages. There is so much information here. I highly recommend you check him out. I mean, arguably his most popular work, and has basically been an influential piece to many stories, novellas, novels after that. I finally read it. It does not take long to read. I read it in about an hour, and I assume anyone can read faster than that because I'm a slow reader. But the tale is of the fellow Ichabod, who is a schoolmaster who arrives in Tarrytown around the year of 1790, which is a quiet rural area. The valley is known as Sleepy Hollow, and Ichabod Crane is described as being tall, thin, and highly superstitious. He likes gossiping, and he's very into sort of witchcraft and all of the legends and tales that the Dutch have basically cultivated being there or have brought over with them from Europe. And basically the populace of this area are all of basically Dutch origin, which accounts for the names. So you've got some absolutely psychotic names here, which at first I thought was a joke, but then I looked into it and it's real. So you've got people like Abraham van Brunt, or nicknamed Brom Bones, and that's just one of the many names that I just looked at and went, really? But then I was wrong. It turns out this is all real. There's very few characters in this book of mention. The four main ones are Ichabod Crane, Katrina van Tassel, Abraham van Brunt, who is basically Ichabod's rival throughout most of the story, and then obviously the Headless Horseman. But then there's a fifth one, which I'll get to at the end there, because it's a bit of a postscript, and I believe some editions of this book don't have it. So that'll be a good one to get into. But Ichabod is a school teacher or a schoolmaster. He came from Connecticut. He's a bit of a gossip. He likes going around and talking to everyone, and sort of integrates himself quite well into the society. Now, he catches the sight of the young woman, or young girl, I don't quite know her name, her age, but Katerina van Tassel, who is the only daughter of a wealthy farmer. And not only that, but then the other person, Abraham von Brunt, who is basically the very opposite of Ichabod, being strong, confident, and the best way to describe him as being sort of along the lines of Gaston from Beauty and the Beast, just that type of personality and of appearance. The first 3/4 of this book, or the first quarter of it, details the landscape, everything about Tarrytown of Sleepy Hollow and the legends itself, and there's all these different little superstitions that are scattered throughout the book, which is quite a good backdrop leading you into it. It gets you built up, ready for the moment. The second and third portions of the book is basically all. This is where I think it's the satirical element comes into it, because I actually thought parts of this book were really funny, and it's all about Ichabod and Abraham basically going up against each other for the affections of Katerina. And Abraham van Brunt, who is basically the nickname Bron Bones, is described as being sort of this guy who leads a gang of loyal followers who basically prank Ichabod and they do all these little conniving schemes just so that he can get with Katrina instead of Ichabod. And honestly, parts of it I thought were really funny. And then the final section of the book is the titular meeting between Ichabod and the Headless Horseman. So I am going to go into some spoiler territory here. If you haven't read the book or the short story, then go read it and come back, because honestly, it will take you an hour, maybe less, because it really is that short. Again, that was a surprise to me. But some of the stuff I loved about this book, again, was the descriptions of nature and of the town itself. Washington paints a very, very clear image of what you were to imagine when reading this. He does a very good job of it. My only true criticism was the fact that with all of the populace surrounding this book and the influence of it, I was quite surprised at how little the titular horseman appears in it. Again, he only appears at the very end. So I'm going to skip basically to the final third of it, because I think that's the real interesting core aspect of this book and why it's remembered. One night, Ichabod goes to this party being held by Katerina's father. It's a grand old time. They're eating, they're dancing. At the end of the night, Ichabod goes to Katerina and basically, I guess, proposes to her, and he's rejected. He leaves, gets on a horse, and proceeds to go home. Now, what follows is some of the best writing I've come across in a long time. It's a section of about, I'd say, 6 or 7 pages detailing where he's becoming a bit paranoid, because also at that party he was talking to various guests there, and they were describing all of these superstitions, and in particular the Headless Horseman. When he appears, he sees this figure in the distance, proceeds to ride away, and the figure chases him on a horseback, and he believes that getting to this bridge to cross it will be the way to get away from him. And then he gets hit in the head, and you don't know whether he's getting hit in the head by the Headless Horseman's head or a pumpkin, but it cuts to the next day. And the next day, they find nothing but his horse without a saddle riding home and a smashed pumpkin. And it is never explained what actually happened to him, whether or not he was attacked by the Headless Horseman, and it turns out the Headless Horseman is real, or there are 2 theories. And this is why the short story will stay with me, because I was really surprised by this. I was under the impression, leading up to the ending here, that the Headless Horseman was real, and to an extent I might still believe that, at least in the aspects of this book. That is one of the 3 theories that are presented to you. The second theory is that after being rejected, he fakes his death, and someone, I think in town the next day or later on, explains that he's actually on the other side of the country, I think practicing as a lawyer or something like that. And then the third one, which is really, really sinister, is that Abraham staged the whole thing and actually killed Ichabod. We never know. It's left up to the reader to decide. This was really intriguing to me. I was not expecting an open-ended type story. But then we get to the postscript, and the postscript is where things get really interesting. And when I was researching it online, it turns out that some editions don't really have this postscript here. It just ends with these theories. Now the postscript, I've got it on my Kindle here. The postscript says, found in the handwriting of Mr. Knickerbocker. Now Diedrich Knickerbocker is the one who wrote this tale here, and he is a pseudonym of Washington Irving, and he has his own whole backstory dedicated to the story. I'd highly recommend looking up Dietrich Knickerbocker because Washington Irving used a lot of pseudonyms early in his career for bits of satirical pieces of writing, and that again, there's too much to dive into there. But in the postscript, it's described this person as a narrator who, way down the line, is retelling this tale in, I think, a bar or something like that. And the people are locked in on him, and then there's this one person who questions them on this whole thing as to what really happened to Ichabod, and the narrator says he can't explain it. He doesn't quite know. That really bumped up to a whole new level there, because the book also begins with a statement found among the papers of the late Dietrich Knickerbocker. So you got the short story here, then you got this postscript from this fictional author on behalf of Washington Irving. So it's a narrator retelling this tale after the tale's been told to you as a reader. And I found that really interesting. So there's bits of writing in this that is really intriguing and really got to me. And the main complaint I have about this, don't get me wrong, I really like the story and the writing in it, and with some bits of writing in it which I'll recite to you. I cannot help but complain that all books these days do not have the same quality of writing, I think, as the ones from 1800s through the 1900s. There just seems to be a tail end. There's a lot in these days. Most books are very declarative and use a lot of the words and like, and nothing doesn't flow as well. I'm not into that sort of thing. I'm not going to name names, but there was a very popular book series involving superheroes that are using their powers for good and evil. I cannot remember the name of the book because it was read about 2 years ago, but the writing in it doesn't matter how good the story is. I like the story, but the writing in it was just so basic that it bored me. The fact that the story isn't the problem, it's the writing is an issue to me, and a lot of books nowadays have that issue for me. But the writing in The Legend of Sleepy Hollow is wonderful. It's so expressive. It just weaves all of these paintings. It's like a story that uses its words for you to imagine some form of a painting, so you can know everything and really put yourself inside of it. That's what I gravitate towards. And getting back to my main criticism was that, again, through influence and through it being referenced so heavily, I was just a little bit disappointed that this Headless Horseman is barely in it, and that a lot of it is actually dedicated to the rivalry between Ichabod and Abraham for the affections of Katerina, which in retrospect means nothing because it only takes up about 20 pages, and the first 10 pages, again, the setup of the whole town, and the final 10 pages is the titular Headless Horseman. But it's not what I was expecting, but I do look forward to rereading it in the future, and with a different set of eyes, and having done the research, coming to the conclusion that I like it a bit more. There's quite a few books in the past that I read and went, nah, it's not for me, but then after some time has passed and I thought about it, I reread it and realised how much I loved it. A good example of that would be Ernest Hemingway. I wasn't the biggest fan of The Sun Also Rises at the time. I've since come to truly love that book. Joseph Conrad, Heart of Darkness. I really did not like it that much the first time I read it, and I now love that book, and I understand the controversy surrounding it. So The Legend of Sleepy Hollow is one that I will definitely come around to. Now, in a brand new segment here, I'm going to read out some word definitions that I had no idea, because this was written in the 1800s. There are words in this book that I have never come across before, and I'd just like to share a few of them with you. And one of them is actually an archaic word, which means it's not in everyday use anymore. So I've got a few here to get into. So the first one is inveterate, which is having a particular habit, activity, or interest that is long established and unlikely to change. That's a word I've never heard before. Imbibed, to absorb or assimilate ideas or knowledge. This one here I don't quite know how to pronounce. Cognomen, which is a name or nickname, and the second definition of this word is even better. An extra personal name given to an ancient Roman citizen, functioning rather like a nickname and passed down from father to son. That is a cool definition, so I will not forget the word cognomen. We got Willem or Whilom, that's W-H-I-L-O-M. This is the archaic word. Formerly or in the past, so that's one. And then we got this is not a definition but rather an animal I never heard of before. Whip-poor-will, a bird which is only heard at night. It receives its name from its note, which is thought to resemble those words. And then the final one, and I'm just going to spell it out because I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it. Potentates, which is a monarch or ruler, especially an autocratic one. So those are some words that I've never heard before, and I think these would be a good one to add to any book reviews or analysis that I do from now on, is just talk about words I never heard before, especially in books of this time period. Favorite passages. So this one here details basically how Washington Irving constructs the landscape. Not far from this village, perhaps about 2 miles, there is a little valley, or rather lap of land, among high hills, which is one of the quietest places in the whole world. A small brook glides through it, with just murmur enough to lull one to repose, and the occasional whistle of a quail or tapping of a woodpecker is almost the only sound that ever breaks in upon the uniform tranquility. That's just wonderful writing there. We've got another one here. If ever I should have wished for a retreat whither I might steal from the world and its distractions and dream quietly away the remnant of a troubled life, I know of none more promising than this little valley. Again, books, novels, novellas, short stories, essays, anything from the 1700s and 1800s through the 1900s is the construction of sentences in that time period is just off the charts. It's wonderful. This is what I gravitate towards. This is why I read. I'd say probably 9 out of every 10 things I read, a lot of them I don't talk about on here, but I just don't really care for. I mean, the stories may be fun, but they're just not worth talking about because I don't like the writing. Every so often, even if it's not a book I love, which is this one here, I still greatly appreciate it. The writing is next level. It will be remembered. This will be the final one I read to you, but it's quite lengthy, but it gives you an idea of the whole superstition and of tall tales and folklore. Some say that the place was bewitched by a high German doctor during the early days of the settlement. Others that an old Indian chief, the prophet or wizard of his tribe, held his powwows there before the country was discovered by Master Hendrik Hudson. Certain it is, the place still continues under the sway of some witching power that holds a spell over the minds of the good people, causing them to walk in a continual reverie. They are given to all kinds of marvelous beliefs, are subject to trances and visions, and frequently see strange sights and hear music and voices in the air. The whole neighbourhood abounds with local tales, haunted spots, and twilight superstitions. Stars shoot and meteors glare oftener across the valley than in any other part of the country, and the nightmare, with her whole ninefold, seems to make it their favourite scene of her gambols. The dominant spirit, however, that haunts this enchanted region and seems to be commander-in-chief of all the powers in the air is the apparition of a figure on horseback without a head. It is said by some to be the ghost of a Hessian trooper whose head had been carried away by a cannibal in some nameless battle during the Revolutionary War, and who was ever and anon seen by the country folk, hurrying along in the gloom of night, as if on the wings of the wind. His haunts are not confined to the valley, but extend at times to the adjacent roads, and especially to the vicinity of a church at no great distance. Indeed, certain of the most authentic historians of these parts, who have been careful in collecting and collating the floating facts concerning this spectre, allege that the body of the trooper having been buried in the churchyard, the ghost rides forth to the scene of battle in nightly quest of his head, and that the rushing speed with which he sometimes passes along the hollow, like a midnight blast, is owing to his being belated and in a hurry to get back to the churchyard before daybreak. Such is the general purport of this legendary superstition, which has furnished materials for many a wild story in that region of shadows, and the spectre is known at all the country firesides by the name of the Headless Horseman of Sleepy Hollow. Now, unfortunately, I'm not going to read every single one to you, but I have highlighted 20 passages of various lengths. That's the longest one there. The writing in this book is insane. The writing in this short story is insane. It's just I highly recommend it just for the writing itself. You will find sentences in there that you will remember. You will find words in there that you will remember. As I read the definitions out to you, there are words there that are highlighted. There's 2 in there that I'll definitely remember. The archaic word whilom or willum. There is a lot to gather here and a lot to delve into. It is a short story, a very, very short story that has all of this stuff going on underneath. Kind of like the iceberg theory for Ernest Hemingway. That's the best comparison. You get the short story, which is above the water, but then everything underneath it is really elevates the material. Everything from the author himself, Washington Irving, to all of these things that he's taken and put together into this one thing, from his time in Europe, from his hometown in that area of Connecticut, in Tarrytown and Sleepy Hollow, all through to these folk tales and just these historical recollections. There are bits of historical recollections in this book here, I will not go into it. This was quite a surprise for me. Now, I rewatched the movie again last night in preparation for this, just to gauge my bearings, and it is a different experience, and it's a lot of fun. It's not like the book that much. I mean, it has all the elements there, but it's much more expansive. The movie is a lot more expansive and deals with a lot more, whereas the book is much more streamlined, which again brings to the whole idea behind whether or not Washington Irving was a great author or just a popular one, or do people respect him more because of his influence in allowing authors at that time period to basically profit from their work. This is very heavy stuff, and I do not quite know the answers, so I will not go into all that stuff there. But there is a lot of meat on this bone to chew. The story itself is just the beginning. I highly urge you just to read the story, which will take you not long at all, and then just do a massive deep dive into all the stuff surrounding the story. I'm going to finish by putting some pictures on the screen right now, which are electronic versions of paintings that were made or drawings that were made after this book came out, which gives you an idea of just the absolute popularity of this thing. Apparently, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow was a massive hit, especially around Halloween time, and really elevated Washington into another realm of populace. He was a really well-known author. So this has been quite an experience. I did not expect this much baggage with a book that's only with a story that's only 40 or so pages long. But did I like the story? Yes. Was I a little bit disappointed? Yes. Is the writing top tier? Absolutely. Did my appreciation for it grow with all the research I come to find after the fact? Absolutely. And I have a feeling in a few years when I reread this, it will keep on growing. There's so much here. There's so much here. I do recommend this short story. I think it's worth reading. There's a lot of satirical elements to it. There is atmospheric horror. It's not a jump scare type horror, or the horror where you finish reading the book and then you won't be able to sleep at night. It's one of those ones which it sort of creeps up on you, and the final 8 pages involving the actual titular chase between the Headless Horseman and Ichabod is something that will be remembered for time to come. This has been a long time between videos in terms of talking about books. It's been a very long time, and I hope to get back into it. And if there's any stories out there, novels, novellas, what have you, that is along the lines of this is the sort of stuff I like, then please let me know in the comments below what you think. And if you have read The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, tell me what you think. Do you agree with me about the writing aspect of it? Do you appreciate it more than you actually love it, or is this just a story that you read as a kid and absolutely adhere to, that you absolutely just adore? Are you a fan of the films? I'm aware there's many adaptations, but the only one that I'm affiliated with is Tim Burton, purely because of my childhood. And yeah, this has been a rather enjoyable experience, and I'm glad to have spoken about it with you. Feel free to comment, like, and subscribe, and share this video if you think it's fun, informative, or just rather stupid and you just want to have a laugh with friends about it. Thank you so much for watching, and see you on the next one. Goodbye.